Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. I hope you all are doing well. In today's video, we will be talking about the recent Ukraine drone attack on Russia, and I will try to explain the full war timeline in simple words. Recently, the war between Russia and Ukraine has entered a new phase. It is no longer only about trenches and front lines. Now drones are flying deep into Russian territory, including strikes on oil refineries near Moscow and even in western Siberia. In the latest reported developments, Ukraine hit a refinery in Moscow for the second time in a week, and President Zelensky later confirmed a drone strike on an oil refinery in Russia's Tumen region, more than 2,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. He said Ukraine has also developed long range drones capable of flying over 3,000 kilometers. So, in this video, let us understand this war in the simplest way possible. We will go step by step from the beginning of the conflict to the full scale invasion in 2022, to the major turning points, and finally to why the drone attacks on Russia are becoming such a big story now. This war has changed from a fast moving invasion into a long, exhausting conflict where missiles, drones, sanctions, energy facilities, and civilian suffering all matter just as much as the battlefield. To understand recent drone attacks, we first have to go back to 2014. The war between Russia and Ukraine began that year when disguised Russian troops covertly entered and took control of Crimea. After that, Russian troops and local proxies seized territory in the Donbas region, and the fighting in eastern Ukraine killed more than 14,000 people before the 2022 invasion even began. So, the war did not start in 2022. The full scale invasion in 2022 was actually a major expansion of a conflict that had already been burning for years. On February 24th, 2022, Russia launched a full scale invasion of Ukraine. Reuters reported that Vladimir Putin authorized what he called a special military operation, and missile and artillery attacks began hitting major Ukrainian cities, including Kiev. Ukrainian defenders stopped Russia from taking Kiev and other major cities, while world leaders condemned the attack and announced sanctions. In the early phase, Russia seems to have believed Kiev could fall quickly, but that plan failed. Ukraine's resistance was much stronger than Moscow expected. This first phase was important because it changed the whole direction of the war. Russia made gains at the start, but it could not capture Kiev. It was noted that Russian forces later captured Kherson on March 2nd, 2022, and that Kherson became the only regional capital taken in the initial offensive. But elsewhere, the Russian advance stalled because of strong Ukrainian resistance and serious Russian logistics problem. In simple words, Russia entered the war with speed, but Ukraine forced it into a longer and harder fight. As the war continued, the battlefield shifted. Ukrainian forces later counterattacked in several areas, and one of the most symbolic moments came in November 2022 when Ukrainian troops entered Kherson again after Russia withdrew from the city. Reuters reported that residents greeted the Ukrainian troops in the center of the Kherson, which had been the only regional capital captured by Russia during the invasion. Around the same time, Ukraine was also receiving large amount of Western military aid and support, while Russia faced expanding sanctions. By 2023, the war had become a long war of attrition. Russia's destruction of Kakhovka Dam in June 2023 flooded territory, killed scores of people, and left up to 1 million people without drinking water. That was a reminder that this war was not only about land, it was also about infrastructure, power, water, and civilian survival. The front lines mattered, but so did bridges, dams, rail lines, ports, fuel depots, and electricity systems. This is where drones enter the story in a big way. Both sides began using drones more heavily, but the conflict gradually showed that long range strikes could now reach far beyond the battlefield. The UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine said that in May 2026, at least 274 civilians were killed and 1,763 injured in Ukraine, the highest total since April 2022, and that long range weapons like missiles and drones caused 45% of those casualties. It also said short range drones were the primary cause of civilian casualties near the front line. So, this war is increasingly being shaped by aerial attacks, not just ground combat. Now, let us come to the latest news. Reuters reported that Ukraine launched a major drone attack on Moscow, hitting the Russian capital's oil refinery for the second time in a week. Zelensky confirmed that Ukrainian drones had struck an oil refinery in Russia's Tyumen region, more than 2,000 kilometers from Ukraine. He said Ukraine's new drones can fly over 3,000 kilometers. In other words, Ukraine is showing that Russia's own territory is no longer fully safe from the war. These strikes matter for three reasons. First, they are symbolic because they show that Ukraine can hit deep inside Russia. Second, they are economic because the targets are often oil refineries and energy facilities that support Russia's war economy. Third, they are strategic because Ukraine says these attacks are meant to slow down Russia's ability to fund and supply the war. Reuters reported that Ukraine's campaign has focused mainly on the oil industry in order to hinder Moscow's war effort. That means these are not random attacks, they are part of a larger plan. But behind all the military language, the human cost remains enormous. UN human rights figures show that the war continues to kill and injure civilians in large numbers. And in May 2026, the highest casualty numbers came from a mix of long range strikes, short range drones, aerial bombardments, artillery, and mines. Since Russia's full scale invasion, nearly 15,000 civilians had been killed and more than 40,600 injured by early 2026, according to UN verified reporting. So, when we talk about drone attacks, we are really talking about a war that keeps expanding in reach and impact. So, the simple story is the war began in Russia's takeover of Crimea in 2014, escalated into a full scale invasion on February 24th, 2022, failed to capture Kiev, turned into a long and brutal war of attrition, and has now entered a stage where drones and long range strikes are taking the conflict deep into Russian territory too. The recent attack on Moscow and Tumen show that this war is still evolving. And that is why the Russia Ukraine war remains one of the most important conflicts in the world today. That's all for today's video. Thank you for watching. Please do like, share, and subscribe the channel. I'll see you in the next one.